And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Hello, and thanks once again for joining us for this Wednesday's edition of Flying Weather. Up first graphic up for tomorrow morning, showing some IFR here, Brooks Range on out across the eastern North Slope and Arctic coast. Some VFR off to the southwest there, all the way down into northern Norton Sound. Then marginal VFR, St. Lawrence Island, Nunivak Island, Pribilofs down to the Alaska Peninsula with a couple of zones of IFR embedded in that here over the Kuskokwim Delta and along the north side of the Alaska Peninsula. Farther west, VFR, followed by marginal VFR from Adak on out to Chimionat. And for the North Gulf Coast, another system pulling northward, socking in moisture here, and with a lot of IFR for the North Gulf Coast from Yakutat right up into eastern Turnagain Arm, into the Chugach Mountains and southern Copper River Basin. Otherwise, marginal for the Panhandle. Then for the afternoon, we've got some IFR up over the northern Lynn Canal area up towards Skagway into the passes there, improving as you head south with VFR breaking out, Prince of Wales Island, and most of the southern Panhandle. And the narrow band of IFR hung up in the Coast Range here, extending in again to western Prince William Sound and into the central Kenai Peninsula. Another batch of IFR here, western Cook Inlet up to the eastern slopes of the western Alaska Range, VFR Kodiak Island. A lot of VFR now from the Copper River Basin right up to the Brooks Range and westward here out and into the Seward Peninsula. IFR, North Slope Arctic Coast. IFR there from the Bering Strait down along the Yukon Delta coast. Marginal VFR on down to the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula. And then some marginal VFR here for Adak and Atka. And for the morning hours, not too bad out here over the Bering Sea. Pretty good. A lot of widespread VFR for all of the Aleutians till you get out toward Attu Island there in Shimia. Otherwise, maybe a little bit of marginal conditions there for the Pribilof Islands. A narrow band of IFR here up along the Yukon Delta coast, Makoriuk to the Bering Strait in over the northern Seward Peninsula, and then just clipping Point Hope and Cape Lisburne eastward there over the North Slope and Arctic coast. IFR here in the south central interior, mainly along the Alaska Range and off to the west and northwest. And still again at some IFR here hung up along the North Gulf Coast Range and the eastern Kenai Peninsula. And then for the afternoon hours, we've got a more extensive area of IFR now in the central interior down into the Kuskokwim Valley and along the, looks like the southern slopes of the central Alaska Range here, and then from about the White Mountains northward in across the Yukon River and the Flats areas. Another band up here, another area for the western Arctic coast and North Slope that now extends down to the north side of the Seward Peninsula, so that'll catch Kivalina on up to Point Hope and Cape Lisburne. Marginal VFR for the most part for the southeast coast and the North Gulf Coast with pretty good VFR, Adak and Atka into the Alaska Peninsula, right up along the southwest coast. Passes for Anatuvik and Adigan, both looking like the lowest conditions, or actually VFR becoming IFR and then IFR becoming VFR. What that means is just it could be IFR at times throughout the day and maybe VFR at other times, especially on the southern entrance. And for Lake Clark and Merrill, IFR for rainy, windy though, VFR. And the eastern Alaska Range looking good, VFR for Isabel and Mentasta. And for Tanita, marginal VFR. Portage though, IFR, especially on the eastern entrance. And Chilcoot and White, IFR. Freezing levels here, 2,000 feet all the way down, well south of the Aleutians now on the surface, farther to the north here, just north of St. Matthew Island, cutting down here to Kodiak Island and then hugging the North Gulf Coast and across the northern Panhandle. 2,000 feet here, not too much farther to the north, and 4,000 feet over the southern southeast coast. And for the icing graphic here, the best potential for seeing any considerable moderate rime icing will be here from about Cape St. Elias on down along the Panhandle in toward Vancouver Island there, along and ahead of that front with all the moisture in that southwest flow. And again, that other system pulling back to the northwest here into the North Gulf Coast. Maybe some considerable moderate icing southern Cook Inlet to the Barren Islands there. And then out here to the west, a chance of isolated moderate mixed icing along the southwest coast into the Alaska Peninsula, and also up over the North Slope and the central and eastern Arctic coast. And looking at the jet stream here, cold upper low here over the area, right over the state, another one back up here over the Russian Far East. And that's got the jet stream with the colder air pushed down to the south here with the strongest winds well south of the Aleutians, only at about 60 knots over the western Aleutians there. Light winds here over all of the interior from the Arctic coast down into the Gulf of Alaska, and the strongest jet stream winds here over western Canada. And for 9,000 feet, 45 to 50 knot winds there, mostly across the border there from the Panhandle, with the strongest over British Columbia at about 90 knots from the south. A couple of low centers here, one just south of Resurrection Bay, another one up over the lower Yukon River Valley areas, making for light wind conditions here over the interior. East at about 30 knots there for the western North Slope, and then northerlies 55 knots there from south of St. Lawrence Island, and about 30 to 50 knots blowing across the Alaska Peninsula area. And looking at 3,000 feet, about the same pattern here. Low pressure again, this one pulling up in toward the Kenai Peninsula. And we've got northerly winds 40 to 45 knots coming across the eastern Bering Sea, just clipping the coastal areas here. Northwest 40 knots across the Alaska Peninsula, and 25 to 30 knot winds from the southwest for the Panhandle. And then a narrow band, almost like a barrier jet here for the North Gulf Coast into Prince William Sound, up to 35 knots there. And then northwest winds, 35 knots from Kamishak Bay in across the Barren Islands. And from there going to turbulence, look for considerable moderate here for the northwest coast, along mountains, right on down southward across St. Lawrence Island, western Seward Peninsula, and Nunivak Island areas. And mechanical turbulence here for the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island into the Barrens, and along the North Gulf Coast.